Welcome back, my friends, to the D-Rate the Hate podcast. I am your host, Wilk of WilksWorld.com, and I am so incredibly grateful that you are taking the time to join me for another powerful DTH episode. Friends, at the D-Rate the Hate podcast, it's all about bettering the world one attitude at a time. See, we did not create the hate, but with your help, we can derate the hate. That all starts with gratitude and personal accountability. We cannot control everything that happens to us in life, but we can control how we react to it. How we act, how we react, no matter what happens to us, how we react to it makes the difference. Friends, there is only one good thing about a bad attitude, and that is that we have the ability as individuals to change it. Here on the DTH podcast, we strive to bring you great guests and provide tools to do just that. Please be sure to share it with your friends. Subscribe if you haven't done so. Ratings and feedback are always greatly appreciated. And with that, let's get to this week's episode. How do we promote a better culture of civility when we're talking about politics? That is the question, my friends. How do we make that happen? It's interesting because our current political climate is probably as toxic as it's been in any of our lifetime. I mean, I would have to guess. But despite what you might think, it's not as toxic as it's ever been. I think we just think that because the 24-hour news cycle and the bombardment of hate and lies and misinformation and just toxicity that we get out of social media. With the endless bombardment of fear, outrage, and grievance peddled by media figures and politicians and these outrage entrepreneurs and these grievance grifters, you would think that it has never in American history been as bad as it is today. But my guest, Julian Adorney, knows that that is not the case. He knows a lot about this. He's written a lot about this. In fact, he recently co-authored an article that I found in Fair Substack. He co-authored that article with Mark Johnson, and they dive into how to bring back civility to our politics. Now, I've invited Julian to join me on the D-Rate the Hate podcast to talk about that article and all the great ideas that he has for real solutions when it comes to depolarization and how we can bring civility back to our discussions about politics. If you are not familiar with Julian Adorney, Julian is a former political op-ed writer and a current nonprofit marketeer. Julian has written for organizations like FAIR, the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, Braver Angels. His work has also been featured in FEE, National Review, Playboy, and Lawrence Reed's economics anthology, Excuse Me, Professor. I am so excited to have Julian Adorney here with me on the D-Rate the Hate podcast. Let's get right to that conversation. Here we go. Julian Adorney, thank you for joining me on the D-Rate the Hate podcast, my friend. I very much appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Julian, I read this article. It came out in FAIR, right? The FAIR Substack. And everybody knows I love FAIR, the Foundation Against Intolerance or Racism. And I see the other day this article comes out called How to Bring Civility Back to Our Politics, which is obviously a big thing that I talk about here on the D-Rate the Hate podcast and in my work with the organization Braver Angels. We're always talking about different ways we can bridge the divide. And one of the things that I think is lacking is people's understanding of the other side and how we even got to this point of incivility. So when I started reading that article, Julian, you started talking or you make a fantastic point in it right in the beginning of the article. You say people think that this is unprecedented in American history to be this divided and this toxic, but that's not necessarily the case, right, Julian?
Right, exactly. And we've had far worse periods of political division in our country. I mean, in the late 1700s, early 1800s, right when our nation was founded, John Adams passed the Alien Sedition Act, which basically tried to outlaw speech by the other party. And the newspapers back in that time would make the worst social media trolls look tame. I mean, they attacked They would just make up these vicious lies about Jefferson or about Adams or about anyone. The newspapers were all highly partisan. That was just founding the country. Obviously, in the 1800s, you had this incredibly vital but also very rancorous debate about slavery, and rancorous for very obvious reasons, right? You're talking about human lives. You have the Civil War. You have, our nation's history has always been one of kind of robust conflict, and ideally we keep it civil, we keep it above the belt, we keep it kind of gentlemanly, but it hasn't always been that way. And I want people, and one of the important things I think is to keep that perspective of we've been here before, we got out of it then, we'll probably be okay.
We will. And I think your concern, and I want to get into what, I know you co-authored this paper with Mark Johnson. I want to get into the, kind of what was your guys' inspiration for this. But the thing that I want everybody to understand is, as toxic as things may seem right now, and they are ugly.
Yeah.
And I know you guys talk about it in the paper, that a lot of it has to do with how much we're constantly bombarded with it, right? So let's start with what was the inspiration? I know you, like I said, you and Mark Johnson co-authored this. What was your guys' inspiration for how to bring back civility in our politics?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The inspiration was actually he and I have been talking about this for a while, and we actually co-wrote a previous article. And in the course that we realized that so many people are terrified of the other side now. You see it all the time. I have liberal family who went off the deep end when Trump got elected. They were just terrified. And these are some of the wealthiest, most privileged people in the world. Relative to anyone 100 years ago or 200 years ago. And I have conservative friends who are terrified of the left. And so we started thinking about, why is this? We live in, again, the wealthiest, most privileged, safest country and safest time period in history. We aren't in danger. We certainly aren't in physical danger the way that we would have been 200 years ago. Violence is much lower. Crime is much lower. We're far, far wealthier. Everything is far, far better. Why are we all terrified? And so the answer that Mark and I kind of came up with is, we have this sort of 24-hour news cycle that just bombards us with everything wrong. And our kind of lizard brains aren't really wired to live in a country of 300 million people that's hyper-connected all the time. And so when we see a news story, for instance, of a stabbing in San Francisco, even if we live in, Denver, Pennsylvania, or New York, our lizard brains don't think, oh, that's a long way away, and let me contextualize that in a broader context of, crime going down, whatever. Our brains think, oh, crap, stabbing, that's dangerous, And when you're bombarded by 50 of these stories a day, because the media kind of realized, a good chunk of the media kind of realized that if it bleeds, it leads, if it's bad news, if it encourages hate, and anger, and fear, then that's going to get more clicks. When you're bombarded by these messages, it can take a real toll on our mental health, and it can make us really kind of hate and fear the other side in a way that I don't think is necessarily justified.
No, that's absolutely right. And it's something that I've talked about so many times on the DTH podcast, Julian, is that 24-hour news cycle, that if it bleeds, it leads kind of thing. The way that our politicians are geared right now to, and now I'm calling it the fog, right? Fear, outrage, grievance. There's a whole industry built around this fog, fear, outrage, and grievance. And you've got this media, the 24-hour media cycle. I'm sure I'm quite a bit older than you, but I can remember when I was a kid, if it wasn't on by 10 o'clock, and then all of a sudden you got the Star Spangled Banner playing, and it's showing. There's nothing going on. I don't know what time. I don't even remember what time it was. Most of the time we didn't have a television when I was a kid, to be honest with you. But when we did, I remembered by that time of night, there was nothing else going on, right?
Yeah.
So you were either waiting for the radio to come on the next morning to find out, what the weather was going to be like, or what you were having for lunch in school that day, or, that kind of thing. But now, 24 hours a day, you've got news stations trying to capture the attention of the whoever's watching. or you've got the internet, this internet ecosystem, this dumpster fire of hate, lies, and misinformation, and everybody's trying to get the maximum number of clicks. Everybody's trying to go viral, and they know that the way to do that is to capitalize on the fog, right? The fear, the outrage, the grievance, because they know if they do, somebody's gonna click, and if they click, they're gonna probably click some more, and it goes into this funnel of ugliness.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
So, and then, I love the fact that you guys get into so much about that fear and fearing the other side, because that is definitely what leads to the hate, and that's the majority of that, Julian, is built off of ignorance, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So talk to me about, I know you've researched this stuff in depth pretty much with what you do, Julian, and the vast majority of the thoughts that people have about people on the other side, most of the time they're probably unfounded, right? It's based on that ignorance. They don't really know, they don't really understand the other side, or that's been my experience. What's your experience?
No, I think that's exactly right. And I think one of the dangers is, I mean, partly it's the mass media and partly it's social media, because we are bombarded with images and sound bites and whatever from the absolute worst members of the other side. I lean fairly libertarian, and the people who are nuanced pro-government, the Matty Iglesiases, folks like that, they don't necessarily take off. They don't necessarily show up on my newsfeed because Twitter, they don't get a lot of hate. Whereas the people who are like fire breathing, like capitalism is awful, we should tear down the founding fathers, we should tear down the statue of the founding fathers, we shouldn't let anyone who disagrees with us speak, all of those kind of like fire breathing messages, those are what go viral. And those are what the algorithms kind of push to us. And so we get this incredibly skewed perspective of the other side, where the 2%, the craziest 2% of the other side, we think that they embody the entire other side. And we've sort of lost the thread that most people we disagree with are just decent, ordinary Americans. They may see the world a little differently than us. They may have, they maybe have a couple different moral values. They may be more interested in patriotism, more interested in, kind of do the crime, do the time kind of justice. And they'd be more interested in welfare and less interested, more egalitarian and less independent. But ultimately, they're decent people who love their kids, love their families, love their communities, want the country to be better. I've known people who would just break down in tears at the very mention of I knew a liberal woman who broke down in tears at the very mention of conservatives, because she just couldn't understand why they would do such terrible things and why half the country was so monstrous. And I thought, oh God, this is sort of the failure of our discourse in a nutshell.
It is, and I think you make a fantastic point, Julian, when you say that 2% that's on either side of that political spectrum. People do lose sight that isn't representative of everybody.
Yeah.
In that would say vote for a Donald Trump, or vote for or not necessarily even vote for Donald Trump, but the that 2% fringe on the far right side of the political spectrum, they aren't fully representative of all the other people,
Exactly.
Or that 2% on the opposite side, who is full on like Bernie Sanders, Che Guevara, Elizabeth Warren. They aren't representative of everybody that's on the left either. And I think you're absolutely right, and you make a phenomenal point when you say, those algorithms are pushing to us those things. One of the things that we've seen in social media, especially as of late, that is just absolutely disgusting, is all of these. Again, they are these outrage entrepreneurs that are pushing these videos of if it's police that are firing on a black man in a in a pursuit situation, or a young black man beating up a white guy,
Mhm.
or all of these different videos, most of which are probably taken out of context.
Yeah.
They don't tell the whole story at all. But what they are engineered to do is increase that outrage, increase that grievance, and
Mhm.
make people believe that that is the norm. Kind of like going back to your example of a stabbing in San Francisco, and then now all of a sudden there's a family in Midwest Iowa that is looking at that, and now all of a sudden, oh, I got to remember to lock my doors tonight. I don't want to get stabbed.
Right.
It's nonsensical how it works. But you're right.
Yeah.
That's the way that our brains work, and that we have to take that into account when we're looking at all this garbage that we're taking in out of this internet ecosystem and out of this 24-hour news cycle.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, and I love the phrase outrage entrepreneurs. Um, I think part of what's happening is, and you do see this with, I think a lot of the most famous kind of outrage entrepreneurs, we don't realize that they have a different incentive system. I don't know Matt Walsh, and it's not necessarily my intention to criticize him as a person. But I'll use this as an example of where he kind of dipped his toe into this territory. He released a video referring to trans activist Dylan Mulvaney, and he called Dylan unearthly and eerie, lifeless, artificial, like all these terrible things. And of course, the video took off. It went viral. A lot of hardcore partisans loved it. A lot of people hated it. But either way, it went viral. And the important thing to realize is that that was probably a net loss for the conservative movement because it sort of hardened progressives' hearts and made it harder for more sympathetic people who are gender critical to actually make inroads on this issue. It kind of painted all gender critical people as assholes, honestly. But it was really good for Walsh. It generated a ton of visibility, a ton of clicks, a ton of money from hardcore partisans who think that he's telling it like it is. And so the incentive for a lot of these folks, and again, Walsh has done some really good work too, but just the incentive is to create outrage because that's how you differentiate yourself. That's how you differentiate yourself from the other pundits who aren't as hardcore.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you get a lot of, money, prestige, clicks, all that stuff that kind of fuels your career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I recently put out a meme, Julian, that says toxicity makes it, or said the problem is toxicity makes it halfway around the world before civility gets its first and like and share. You know,
Yeah, I
and
saw that.
it's one of those things that it's so depressing, but it's so true because
Mhm.
what happened or what would happen in this world, Julian, if people put as much effort into promoting civility. Like I said, like the organization I do so much work with, Braver Angels, they are doing
Mhm.
so much work, so putting in so much effort to bridge that political divide. Bring
Mhm.
people together of differing mindsets, not to change their mind, but to have the conversation. What if more people, Julian, put in the kind of effort and we could figure out a way to make civility go viral the way that toxicity does? I mean, and I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? Because I would love to figure out a way to do it because I think it would change the dynamic of the whole planet.
No, I think you're exactly right. I think civility. So two things come to mind. One is that, and this is the idea behind Heterodox Academy, which is this incredible organization I love. But the idea is that great minds don't always think alike, and no political party has a monopoly on truth. And so liberals and conservatives and libertarians, we all need each other. Libertarians, we need conservatives and liberals to tell us when we're going off the deep end and when we're pushing too fast towards, deregulation or whatever it may be. Liberals, I think we've seen with San Francisco, for instance, that liberals need conservatives to remind them, look, police do serve a valuable purpose because when you just tell police to stay on their hands and stop doing their jobs, crime rates skyrocket. And conversely, conservatives need liberals to tell them, look, there are really heartbreaking cases where the criminal justice system went way overboard and someone's in prison for 20 years for, trying to sell pot to like make rent one night, and that needs to change. And so we all kind of need each other in order to kind of fix the problems in society. And civility is the way to do that. Civility is how we can all talk to each other and all learn from each other and all kind of find the truth instead of just finding your own partisan solutions.
That's exactly right, man. I think, and I think that the answer to what you're talking about is conversations. What we
Yeah.
found, what I find now, Julian, and I see it. I saw it today. Uh, in a in a quote, or not a quote. It was a speech that Hakeem Jeffries was on the floor pontificating about how conservatives don't want to allow your children to learn about the Holocaust. Now we know that that's a full-on lie. I mean, it's
Yeah.
an outright lie, right?
Right.
But politicians, and I'm just using that as an example because I saw it like an hour ago.
Mhm.
But there's so many, and it's not exclusive to one party doing that, you know. But what bothers me so much about that is those lies are genuinely geared towards increasing that fog, right? The fear, the
Mhm.
outrage, the grievance, and capitalizing on that fear, outrage, and grievance. But what it does is it drives a further wedge in between people that would normally be reasonable
Yeah.
and have a conversation. But now what we see is these politicians do this, and then it gets played on a loop. It either goes viral on social media, or Fox News is playing it in one context and CNN's playing it in another context, and now we've got, it's whipping up that fog.
Mhm.
It's just increasing the animosity between people of differing mindsets, and now all of a sudden we find ourselves in a situation where people aren't even having the conversation anymore because they hate each other. They hate each
Yeah.
other again based on ignorance. They've got false information that they believe, and now they won't even have the conversation anymore.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And it is easy for us to forget that, these politicians who are whipping up the fog, the interest groups that fundraise off of them, Fox and CNN, they all do have an agenda of encouraging that fog, encouraging that fear, outrage, and grievance. And the way out of that, I think, or one of the ways out of it, is for us to kind of unplug and just go offline, take in news fast. Don't just completely tap out of politics, because we do have obligations as citizens of a republic. But turn off the TV, turn off social media, unplug, go outside and talk to your neighbors. If you're a Democrat, find real flesh and blood Republicans among your neighbors and just talk to them. They're far, far more reasonable than the crazies you find who get amplified on social media, or the caricature of Republicans that, folks like Jeffries can suggest, and vice versa. When Republicans go and actually talk to Democrats in real life, it can be incredible. I mean, I've found as a libertarian, I have this incredible gift where most of my family is liberal. And that's really, even though I kind of do this for a living, and so it's very easy for me to spend a lot of time on Twitter, and a lot of time reading these articles. My family always kind of helps me touch grass, because I remind myself, oh, wait a minute, this person who I really love and respect actually voted for Bernie. So all Bernie supporters can't be bad. Maybe they just see the world differently.
Right. No, it goes to a conversation, or what? Not even a conversation. It was somebody I was bouncing back and forth with on Twitter today, and I was just trying to, because I knew this person. This person had commented on something I had put out there, or they had commented on something that somebody else had put out there. I can't remember what actually got the conversation started, but after several back and forths, I said, "Do you ever actually talk to, or have you ever actually had a conversation with somebody who and identifies as a Trump supporter?" And
Mhm.
it was basically no. And I said, okay, so do you then believe that, because she was, adamant that Trump is the most evil thing, and the worst thing that's ever happened to the country, and probably the biggest threat to the world, as many seem to think. And I
Yeah.
said, so do you believe then that everybody who supports, Donald Trump is then either evil or totally naive? And it was just a
Mhm.
one word answer: yes. Okay.
Wow.
So I mean, there's really at that point there's no longer, you know, and I never even identified. The only thing was me as the D-Rate the Hate podcast. So it wasn't that
Yeah.
that I was identifying as some political pundit or some you know outrage entrepreneur or whatever. I mean, I don't dive
Yeah.
into the ugliness. Not to say that there wasn't a time when I used to, and I still espouse the fact that I'm a genuine unapologetic conservative, but
Mhm.
I'm not going to dive into the mud and play into the fog,
Yeah.
so to speak, like I probably did in the past. So,
Mhm.
but now for me, it's just genuine curiosity as to what people believe, because one of the things that I've found, and you can tell me if you found this in your research too, is is I've never found a I've never found somebody on the left that truly understands conservatives the
Mhm.
way that conservatives understand conservatism. And so that's where it got to me when I was like, okay, well, we got to get back to a point where we're having conversations. To the point that you made in the article, Julian, where all of a sudden in recent years now people have completely tied to their identity whatever their political beliefs are. Talk a little bit about that, because I remember for most of my adult life up until like the past 12, 15 years, nobody ever talked about politics. Politics is one of those things where,
Yeah.
okay, come around election day, we'll worry about it, we'll go out, we'll vote. Um, I don't think people are any more educated on politics now. I think they're just more vocal and more pissed off about it. What are your thoughts?
No, I think that's absolutely right. Yeah, we're not more educated. We are more vocal. We are more pissed off, and we do associate with our identity. And from a spiritual and a practical standpoint, associating politics with your identity is it's a dangerous trap to fall into, and it's a trap that a lot of us can fall into. I obviously still lean pretty libertarian, but I used to be, my early, mid, late 20s. I was like a hardcore libertarian. I was hardcore partisan. And the reason was I had this sort of psychological attachment to libertarianism where it was my identity. And so I couldn't necessarily, I could listen to people who disagreed, but I couldn't really hear them because, if someone made a case about expanding Social Security or even not privatizing it, if they were right, then it's like, oh my God, my identity just, there's a giant rupture there, it just blew up. Like my whole identity was libertarian, and now, now it's something else. Now I'm debating the need for government in some case. And so when we identify with our politics or a political party, we sort of lose the ability to have these kind of good faith conversations, because anytime someone makes a point saying that our political ideas may be flawed, we take it as though they're coming at us with a chainsaw. Our fight or flight kicks in. We take it as a visceral attack on our identity. And honestly, for people who are very, very hardcore partisans, the same fight or flight kicks in as though someone were to punch you in the face. And that's where we get a lot of the yelling and anger on Twitter.
Mm-hmm. No, that's exactly right. I mean, once we got to a point where people started to make politics a big part of their identity. And then, it's something that I've talked about a lot recently with, with Reggie Wilson, and then in my work with Braver Angels, is kind of this human value initiative, and how we see ourselves and our own value and what we value in ourselves. Once we started tying that politics and the politics of or our politics to our identity, and then our identity becomes what we value about ourselves, all of a sudden somebody's attacking that that political identity. Your natural reaction of a human being is to get defensive.
Yeah,
As soon as you get defensive, your ears lock up. I mean, you
yeah,
you are not hearing what the other side is saying anymore. Now you're getting louder, they're getting louder, we're talking past each other, nothing's getting accomplished. And again, right back into the fog. You had talked a little bit about it, but this media fasting thing. That's kind of a fascinating idea. Talk a little bit more about that as we round out our time together here, Julian. This has been a great conversation. I want to get into what you see as the solutions to these problems. I mean, like I said, you're more of a libertarian. You've got a lot of liberal family members. You interact with people from both sides a lot.
Mm.
You've opened up your mind. I've certainly opened up my mind in recent years. What did you do to get past that locked in identity of libertarianism to start being able to listen to people of differing mindsets than you as an individual?
It's a really good question. And the answer is that I sort of did the deep psychological work on myself to identify why I had such a strong attachment to libertarianism. I think it's just like anything else. If you find anytime you find yourself clutching something with a white knuckle grip mentally, whether it's your job or whether it's like, oh man, this girl, this guy like has to go out with me, or whether it's, oh, I have to take this trip, or it's like, oh, my political party has to win. There's an opportunity there to dive into your own psychology and figure out, why does this matter so much? Like, what about this? Maybe it's something from your childhood, maybe it's an experience in your past, whatever it may be, but what about my own experience of life made this so important? And then once I could really observe that, in my case, I dealt with some unpleasant authority figures in my past. And so I kind of subconsciously sort of associated that with government. And once I realized that, then I was no longer identified with it. Then I could just kind of observe that belief in myself. The second thing, though, was that, and especially as a Christian, I believe my identity is as a child of God, and that is far, far deeper and more meaningful and bigger than just my identity being a libertarian. Jesus was not a Republican. Jesus was not a Democrat. There weren't these two sides in 0 AD, and the Son of Man didn't endorse Donald Trump in 2020. I think whatever your faith is, obviously a lot of us on both sides of the aisle are Christian. A lot of folks are, Jewish or Muslim or are just more kind of spiritual. I have Buddhist family, but every spiritual tradition teaches that we have this sort of God-breathed identity that is deeper and fuller and more meaningful and more mystic than just our fleshly bodies. And in the same way, it is also much deeper and more meaningful and more mystic than just our political affiliations. And once I kind of tapped into that, once I saw myself as a child of God first and a, libertarian second, I could start to hold these ideas much, much more loosely because my priority became following God rather than, making sure that Gary Johnson got elected or whatever it may be.
No, I think that's a fantastic point, and I think people really do need to, step away from that white knuckle grip on politics being part of their identity.
Mm,
Realize that there's things out there that are much bigger than us, and um, the best way to get through this is to have a much more introspective look at themselves as individuals.
mm,
Really focus on why you're so tightly gripped to whatever the topic du jour is, right?
yeah.
Why is it that you feel you are incapable of having a conversation with
Mm,
somebody who does not believe like you do? We're
yeah.
all human beings. The more we treat each other like monsters instead of, you know, in your and my case, being a Christian,
Mm,
children of God, we all have uh, we all have a certain humanity about us, and the
yeah.
longer we keep treating people of differing mindsets like they're monsters, like there's some kind of evil incarnate whatever, we are not going to get past this toxic time in our history. But the
Mhm.
bigger thing to remember, like you and I talked about, is it's probably not nearly as bad as many would have you believe.
Mhm.
But we do need to work for continuous improvement. It can always be
Yeah.
better, you know. So you made some fantastic points, Julian. I love the article in the Fair Substack, how to bring civility back to our politics. There's so much good work being done. Um, Tell the DTH listeners where people can find out more about you and what you may have coming up in the near future.
Yeah, absolutely. Mostly I'm active on Twitter. And so my Twitter name is Julian Adorney. My Twitter handle is Julian_Liberty. Um,
Okay.
and so yeah, that's where I post all my articles. It's where I have a lot of discussions. Yeah, that's the best place to find me.
Very cool, my friend. Well, it was very great getting to know you a little bit more, Julian, and very grateful to now call you a friend, and hope to have you back on the D-Rate the 8 podcast another time.
Absolutely. Same here.
Friends, if there's anything in this episode that provided exceptional value to you, please make sure to hit that share button. Share it with your friends, share it far and wide, and of course, if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe right from our website so you can get the D-Rate the Hate podcast sent to your email inbox every week. So this is Wilk wrapping up for the week saying get out there, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything that you've got, and remember it's up to you to make each and every day the day that you want it to be. If there is something that you would like to share with me, you can catch me on most social media platforms, or you can email me directly, wilk@wilksworld.com. With that, my friends, I am going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week. Take care.